All right, let's move on to the next composition technique that I want to talk about. And this isn't specifically a composition technique per se, but it's more of a tool that you can use to increase the impact of your compositions. And that's looking at how we use strong shapes. And that is essentially thinking about how we utilize the power of shapes. And in the most basic form, when we're talking about shapes, we're talking about circles, squares, rectangles, triangles, these basic fundamental shapes, and how we incorporate them into our photographs to kind of tap into that primal appreciation of these simple shapes that we see all around us in the world. So to give you an example of this, I'll just bring up this first image from the Jakarta, the Sinking City story. Now, if you look closely at this, we're in a community in central Jakarta, and I was photographing this lady who was washing her dishes. You know, very universal activity and experience. And for this image, I was obviously shooting downwards, so I was taking an elevated position, shooting downwards, and I noticed these circles appearing from what she was doing. So I noticed the large kind of black pan that she was washing her dishes in, but also the different plates that were in the basin that she was washing in. And so by focusing on these shapes, you can see that we're using a number of different circles within the image. And just that simple idea of using multiple circles actually helps draw your attention first to the large pan that she's cleaning within the basin, sorry, and then it draws you into those three plates that she's washing. But also, you'll see the position of her hand, how she has it spread out and right in the middle of that white plate. And that's really the focus of the image, her hand on that white plate. But the hand is, you're drawn to it through these circles. And so the circles actually draw you into the image. And so using those circles is a really interesting and powerful way to, again, draw your viewers' attention to something that you want them to look at within your image. Again, here is an example of that. Let me bring this image up a little larger so you can see. Now, again, we're back in the mangrove forests here with this picture. And this was a fisherman who was collecting his catch from the day. And you can see how he'd laid out these small fish on this piece of plastic. And that was his hand off to the right-hand side. He was actually waving flies away from his fish. But if you look closely at the image, and I'll just bring it up larger here so you can see how there's a strong diamond shape that has been created. I suppose if you tilted your head, it would look a little bit more like a square. But from this position of the image at the moment, it's this diamond shape which frames the fish. You could argue it's a frame in a frame as well as a strong shape, but it frames those fish and it draws your attention into them. And so just by using this shape on its side, again, it draws your attention to something different within the frame that you want your viewer to look at. And there's a beautiful pattern in the way that the fish have kind of fallen on this piece of plastic. So you've got a pattern, you've got the frame in a frame, you've got a shape, and then you've also got this interesting moment where the fisherman is trying to get rid of the flies which are swirling around. So all of these different things combine together to make an interesting image. So there's not just one thing happening within the image. There's not just one technique. I'm often trying to combine different techniques within one image because, again, it just makes more interesting images and it increases the chance that you, as the viewer, will look at my image for longer, and perhaps you'll read the caption and you'll want to learn about who is this fisherman, what species are those fish, why is this picture important to the story, what's the issue that are affecting these mangroves. Composition for me It's not about making pretty pictures. It's about creating compelling images that draw you into the story that I'm trying to tell and trying to share with you as a photographer and photojournalist. If you look at this image taken in the port area of Jakarta, northern part of the city, you can probably, now that we've been talking about shapes, we've been talking about the rule of thirds, you're probably starting to see some of these ideas coming through a little bit clearer in my pictures. And so here with this, we're talking about shapes, strong shapes. You can see the shape of the boats create this triangle. We've got the door frame there. But also, if you think back to the rule of thirds, you'd see that I've offset those men walking to the right-hand side. So again, I'm creating a balance in the frame. I'm using the shapes. Again, always trying to create some kind of interesting and compelling composition. And you can find these shapes and you can find these compositions in even some of the most simple scenes, like this little pontoon on the side of a river in Jakarta. You can see we've got some of these triangular shapes that we're using just by not photographing the pontoon from a right angle, but we're kind of offset to the side, creating these triangles. And also you could go into even smaller details of looking at the circle created by the tire, or even the little triangle created by the chicken walking. As its legs move apart, it creates a little triangle there, which is more effective than if you imagine the chicken was, if the two legs were just together like a line. It's much more effective to capture not just chickens, but also people. If you're photographing people in a scene, they're taking that step where they're creating that triangle. And that's actually a really interesting way to create a shape within your frame. And it's actually much more pleasing to look at when you are looking at your images, or when your viewers are looking at your images too. Very small details can make a big difference. And so look for these overarching shapes within your picture, but also look for the smaller shapes as well, because those can be really useful, and they can make your images really much more powerful as well. So my tips for using strong shapes are: look out for all the different kinds of shapes, like I said, whether they appear from man-made structures, they can be circles, squares, rectangles, any shape can work. And they will vary depending on what situation you find yourself in. Frame your compositions to make full use of the strongest shapes. So if you have a primary shape that dominates your frame, try to focus in on that and make sure that that is one of maybe the focal points of your image, and then look for those secondary shapes that you might be able to use to create interest as well. And point three, like I just mentioned, look out for those subtle shapes and patterns that can help add interest to your images. Because again, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make interesting images. And in these situations, sometimes one shape might dominate. Other times you might be able to use a combination of shapes. But whichever situation you find yourself in, think carefully about how your shapes are used, and what you want to draw your attention, what you want you to draw your viewers' attention to help tell the story of your images.